In the last couple of videos, we were looking at how to build this table one of demographic characteristics, or this might be participant characteristics. And a question here might be, do I need to add p-values onto this table? So I'll talk about that in a second, but the first thing I would say is it's not enough just to build this table. We also need to describe it in words. So above here, there should be a paragraph describing what is going on. And this is where you help the reader interpret what you have found out through investigating all these summary statistics. And this leads into whether or not we need to do any statistical tests. So sometimes it is worth doing the tests and sometimes it is not. And there's no hard and fast rule. I think for an experiment, it's very important to check that you have a fair design between your intervention and your control groups, or whatever your groups are that you're comparing. Because if there is some bias in the allocation of participants to groups, then that's going to affect how you interpret the experiment, if you can interpret it at all. So in an experimental context, I think it's really important to check that you don't have differences between groups that would indicate nothing about the results of the experiment. It would indicate that there was a problem with the design. So checking the design is a good reason for doing tests here. In this sort of case, I'm of two minds. It might be helpful to add p-values onto this table, but the other thing is this is not an experiment. This is literally what happened on the Titanic, and the groups are not equal, and there's going to be historical context around this. So in this case, I think it might be enough to go through and describe what the differences are. So we can see that the percentage of females increases with the lower classes. So there were a lot more men in first class than there were comparatively in third class. Now, I don't know enough about the historical context to know why this would be. And this is where I would have to work with an historian who understands who could travel and what the gender differences were in the ability to travel. And then also this would include the age distribution, because there is a difference here in that and we can see this with the numbers. If we just look at the age distribution of third class, is a lot less in the sort of 18 to 64 age group. And there's a lot more missing. So I don't know if that just means there's less data recorded for the poorer people. I don't know. So I feel like all of this needs to be explained with some historical context. And then the disparity in fares is so enormous, going from £60 down to £8 for the median fare prices. I don't think you need a test to tell you that there is a difference there. So I think if you have very large differences and it's this kind of descriptive study, you don't necessarily need to add in any tests to this table. However, that said, depending on whether you're aiming for publication and what discipline you're in, you may be requested to add some p-values on, and they'll most likely, if you can see the difference and it's that obvious, you'll probably get significant p-values. Now, the caveat here is if you're working with secondary data and you have a lot of it, so these are reasonably large groups, but they're not enormous. If you have very large sample sizes, so if you've got thousands of data points, the problem you're going to have is that any small difference is going to pop up as being statistically significant, because your sample size is so large that you have a lot of power to detect small differences. Conversely, if you have very, very small sample sizes, it may look like you have big differences between the groups and potentially nothing will be significant because your sample size is so small. So just keep in mind that if you are going to do any testing between your groups, you need to think about, why am I doing the test? What is that telling me? And then also describing the size difference. It's not enough to say there was a significant difference between the groups. You have to describe what that difference is. So in this case, going from 55% female in first class up to nearly 70% female in third class, that's a 15 percentage point difference. So to me, that seems quite large. And that's where we would have to bring in some expert knowledge to understand that. Now, if you're not sure whether or not you should do some testing in your particular situation, it would help you to read other papers similar to what you're looking at. So, and if you want to see layouts for table ones of participant characteristics, you can just search it and you'll find lots of examples on Google, but it's always good to look in the area that you're working in. So if your study is in global health, then go to some global health journals or public health journals. And here you can see there's a lot of differences in what's going on. So this one here, I don't know what this study is. I've just turned it up on the Google search. Our participants are nurses and students. Now that already tells me we're going to have a difference between these two groups, because clearly the nurses are going to be qualified, which means they're likely to be older, and students are still studying, so they'll probably be younger. And we have this age difference here. Actually not as big as what we might expect, but then I don't even know what paper this came from. All the information I have is nurses and students. But if we have two groups that are clearly going to be different anyway, does it need any statistical testing? I don't think so. You could just go and describe, these are the differences between nurses and students. If we have a look at some other examples, here they clearly felt it was important to make some comparison in the characteristics between patients with tuberculosis and those without. Again, I don't know the context, so we could look more into that study. So if you have some keywords, you could put them up there and turn up something that's relevant to you, or go straight to the journals. I often just do this as a shortcut if I'm looking for examples. And I can see this one here, it says control. So Microsoft Connect. Oh, this looks like an interesting study that I would like to look at. Step mat training and a control group. So as soon as I see the word control, I'm thinking this is probably an experiment. I don't know exactly what the design is. So they want something to do with movement, I'm guessing, and exercise. But you would want to show that your groups are equivalent at the start of the study, because then it makes the comparisons you make about the results at the end more reliable, more justifiable. It's like, we designed a good study, look how similar they are at the start, now we can compare what happens at the end. Now, it doesn't mean you don't need to adjust for anything in the analysis, it just means you've got a good starting point. And here they have added on p-values, and there are no significant differences between the groups. The sample sizes are not enormous, so there will be some variation that aren't significant. And this is where you have to be careful, because if this was a different study design and you had thousands of people in each group, even this small difference here would turn up as being significant. So just keep that in mind, that this significance is largely determined by sample size. And if you have a study on secondary data with thousands and thousands of observations, you need to be really careful about what you test and why you test it, because very small differences are likely to pop up as being significant. So I'll leave this here, and then in the next video we might talk about how we would actually go through, just review choosing a test if we were going to add some to our table of participant characteristics.